Well, hijacked buildings in the Johannesburg inner city have property owners at their wits' end. The Johannesburg Property Owners and Managers Association says the issue has gotten out of hand at this point, but to the point where their members also seek advice on a weekly basis. A fire broke out in the early hours of this morning at a building on the corner of Albert and Delver Streets in Marshalltown. But for more on this, we're now joined by Angela Rivers, the association's general manager. She joins me this morning to have this discussion regarding the tragedy that we've all witnessed at this stage. 62 fatalities, 43 injuries, amongst them 7 children to have died. The young has been between 1 and 2. Angela, a very warm good morning to you. Heart-wrenching. And I don't want to pose this question as an I told you so question, but was this a concern when it comes to hijacked buildings, that besides obviously the economic side, the side where the landlords or the owners don't benefit any profits, livelihoods, lives are at risk in these buildings?
This has always, good morning. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And even though it's a tragedy that this has happened and the loss of lives, our heart goes out to all the families. It's devastating. And this is something that we have come to expect in hijacked buildings, because when a building is hijacked, all of the fire safety, all the safety measures that have been put in that building to protect the building have been removed and sold for scrap or just destroyed. So I can guarantee you every single hijacked building is a fire risk. And this particular building is owned by the city of Johannesburg. It's a heritage site, and it's been hijacked, as you can see, for a very, very long time. And we have been begging the city to look at these buildings and do something. And now we're in a situation where we have families that have nowhere to live, people who have lost family members. And this has been a long time coming, and it will keep happening until the city wakes up. It's devastating.
Some of the descriptions, Angela, we're receiving, from obviously those who are either residents inside or neighbors or have been inside the building, say the building was almost like an informal settlement inside those 5 floors, partitions which include shacks on each floor. I mean, just give us a description of some of the buildings that are hijacked that you have been inside and the harrowing conditions that you have seen inside these buildings.
These buildings are heartbreaking. I've been in many hijacked buildings, and it is exactly that. If you take an informal settlement, like the huts, that have been built in informal settlements, and literally just transfer that into the inside of a building, it's high risk, overcrowded. Most times the electricity and water has been disconnected. There's illegal electricity connections, which are very dangerous, which is a big way that fires start. If the building doesn't have electricity, a lot of people will make little fires within their little rooms in order to cook food, and everyone is packed on top of each other. When a fire does break out, it is virtually impossible for everybody to escape in an orderly manner because there is no structure left in the building. There are no fire exits. I've personally been in a building where there was no water, no electricity, and a woman was going into labor in the dark in the basement, and she wouldn't let them services take her out the building to have the baby outside the building because she was scared that they wouldn't let her back in afterwards. So this baby was born in the dark in the basement.
Sure.
And this is continuously being allowed by the city of Johannesburg because they are the only ones that have the power to fix this. We as the private sector can only do so much.
Angela, why do you think this is being allowed? Why do you think this has been allowed to go on for? Because the topic of hijacked buildings is not a new one. It's almost a big elephant in the room. Even as a South African or a resident of Johannesburg, when you walk past or drive past the Johannesburg CBD, we all see these buildings. We all see the conditions of these buildings. The question is, do the very same, City of Joburg officials see what we see? And if they do and they know it's a problem, why has nothing been done about it thus far?
So they definitely know what is going on. We've been part of many tours where we've taken officials around to hijacked buildings. Every mayor has gone through a hijacked building. It is not something that they are not aware of. They are very well aware of it. The problem with the hijacked building is it's very complex, and you need to get every single government department involved. You've got to get Joburg Water, City Power, Social Services, Bylaw Enforcement, JMPD, Home Affairs, Economic Development, every department, because it covers so many different aspects within our bylaws and our policies that not one organization, not one branch of the government can fix it. To try and get all of those people into one room and one meeting, even with the ease of having it online, is virtually impossible. They do not take it seriously. And I think they kind of expect the private sector to just fix it like we fix everything else.
Perhaps if you have any information to share with us, Angela, just in terms of the dealings of a hijacked building, there must be somebody responsible for these hijacked buildings. Is this a criminal? Is this someone feared by even law enforcement themselves? Is this someone very powerful or influential? Who is behind the operating and running of these hijacked buildings? Are these residents and tenants paying any sort of rent or protection fees? What can you tell us about who could possibly be responsible for these tenants still living in these buildings?
So there's two main, well, I'd say there's three main types of building hijackings. First, you have the one where you have a bunch of disgruntled tenants who feel that the building isn't being managed properly by the owner, and they form a syndicate and they kind of take over the building they take over the management of the building, and then they force everyone to pay the rent to them. Those very rarely happen in well-managed buildings. The second type of building hijacking that you will have is where a syndicate moves into the building with the intention of hijacking the property. It's a lot easier for them to hijack properties that are owned by the municipality or by provincial government, because the city of Johannesburg has a lot of buildings that are owned by provincial and local government. Those are very easy to hijack because they're not managed properly at all. Once the syndicate moves in, they kind of use bullying tactics to get the tenants to pay them rent. It's important to understand that the tenants living in these buildings are not criminals. They are desperate people looking for a place to live. They do not fit into the normal structures of rentals. And they're not paying cheap prices either. These prices are paid weekly. You can pay up to 600 to 1,000 Rand a week to stay in those conditions. So it's not like it's cheap accommodation. It's just easily accessible. And then the third type of hijacking is political hijacking, where we see certain political parties going into buildings and saying, this is our building now, we will now take over it. It's been promised to us, and then they will just take over the building through intimidation. Those are a lot more difficult to deal with because they usually come in a big crowd of like 15, 20 people, where the other two are a lot more nefarious and underground to try and infiltrate the building. Once the building has been hijacked and the hijackers are collecting rent, it's very difficult for a legitimate landlord to try and get their building back under control. And that is why we always say, if you are a landlord, make sure your buildings are managed properly. Make sure you have security and listen to your tenants. Yeah. It's very important. The first scenario that I created is tenants being disgruntled because the buildings weren't managed properly. Those kind of ones can be handled very quickly and easy. The last two are a lot more difficult, and unfortunately SAPS does not get involved with hijacked buildings. I have an incident down the road on Louis Botha where a building was hijacked, and the police were actually seen outside having drinks with the building hijackers. So you will get support from SAPS. It has to be, it actually has to be, everybody needs to work together. That is the only solution to a hijacked building.
Absolutely. Angela, thank you so much for speaking to us. We have to leave it there. I wish it was for different, circumstances, but a very necessary conversation to have, quite a tragic reality check, and hopefully this could be a learning curve and a lesson for South Africa as a whole when it comes to, the standards and just how buildings, particularly hijacked buildings, CBDs, can get out of control. The Johannesburg Property Owners and Managers Association, her name being Angela, thank you so much for joining us right here. Her name being, of course, Angela Rivers, and thank you for joining us right here on Newslink.